I'm Margaret Brennan in Washington, and this week on Face the Nation, protesters and federal authorities clash in Southern California as the Trump administration ramps up nationwide roundups of those who could be in the country illegally. President Trump's mandate to escalate detentions and potentially deportations set the scene for violent protests in Los Angeles this weekend. The president now says he's calling in the National Guard. We'll have the latest, and we'll speak exclusively with Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. Texas Republican Congressman Tony Gonzalez will also be here, and will tell you what Americans think of Trump's immigration and deportation policies. Then, as President Trump lobbies the Senate to get his big, beautiful bill passed, what impact will the Elon Musk factor have on some components of the bill that even Republicans don't like? We'll talk with White House economic advisor Kevin Hassett and Minnesota Democrat Amy Klobuchar. Finally, as efforts from the U.S.-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation continue to unravel, what kind of aid can get to the hundreds of thousands suffering? We'll talk with the head of Save the Children, Janti Soeripto. It's all just ahead on Face the Nation. Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. We begin today in Southern California, a region that has now become the latest epicenter of the nation's contentious debate over immigration policy. A federal law enforcement official tells our Homeland Security correspondent Nicole Skanga that multiple federal officers were injured in confrontations with protesters in Los Angeles this weekend. CBS News immigration reporter Camilo Montoya Galvez has the latest.
Chaos erupted in the Los Angeles area over the weekend, following increased activity across the country by ICE, the agency charged with carrying out President Trump's sweeping immigration crackdown. Videos captured a standoff between activists and heavily armed federal agents, and people throwing projectiles at law enforcement vehicles. Late Saturday night, the president called up 2,000 National Guard troops to support ICE, saying the clashes constitute a form of rebellion against the authority of the U.S. government. California National Guard troops arrived this morning, gathering at a downtown federal building where immigrant detainees are processed. The move bypassed the authority of California's Governor Gavin Newsom, who denounced it as an inflammatory action. The large-scale immigration arrests in Southern California are part of a broader expansion of ICE operations, following pressure from the White House for the agency to increase its arrest rate to 3,000 a day. Internal data obtained by CBS News shows that over the past week, ICE averaged roughly 1,500 daily arrests, a 127% increase from President Trump's first 100 days in office. More than 54,000 detainees are now in ICE custody. ICE has been able to boost its arrest levels by taking more aggressive tactics like arresting migrants, attending their court hearings, or check-in appointments across the country. The federal agency is also receiving help and support from other agencies like the FBI, Border Patrol, and the Drug Enforcement Administration. Margaret?
That's Camilo Montoya Galvez in Paramount, California. And we are just receiving word from our LA Bureau correspondent Nydia Cavazos that activists are calling for a, quote, mass mobilization there later today. So we will continue to monitor the developing story. We go now to Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, who joins us from her home state of South Dakota. Good morning to you, Madam Secretary.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me, Margaret.
Well, we are seeing from the president's proclamation that he can federalize, he says, 2,000 California National Guard forces for 60 days under Title X authorities. Which units are being deployed? Are they military, police, and exactly what are their orders?
Yes, President Trump is putting the safety of the communities that are being impacted by these riots and by these protests that have turned violent. And he's putting the safety of our law enforcement officers first. So these 2,000 National Guard soldiers that are being engaged today are ones that are specifically trained for this type of crowd situation where they'll be with the public and be able to provide safety around buildings and to those that are engaged in peaceful protests, and also to our law enforcement officers so they can continue their daily work.
So our CBS team is reporting that the California National Guard officers are at that Edward Roybal Center in LA. This is a plaza with a federal building. Courtrooms are there, a processing center, a detention center, a veterans clinic. Are the soldiers going to remain around the federal building? Or are you planning to have them go throughout the city of Los Angeles?
I won't speak specifically to all the locations where the National Guard soldiers will be deployed to, or where they will be conducting different operations as far as security concerns. They're there at the direction of the president in order to keep peace and allow people to be able to protest, but also to keep law and order. That is incredibly important to the president. He recognizes he was elected to make sure that every single person in this country was treated exactly the same, and that we would enforce the laws. And that is what ICE is doing every day as they're out on our streets and working to go after bad criminals and people that have perpetuated violence on these communities. The gang members we have picked up in LA because of their hard work are horrible people. Assault, drug trafficking, human trafficking. They are now off of those streets and they are safer because these ICE operations are ongoing. Unfortunately, we've seen some violent protests happen, and that's why these National Guard soldiers are being utilized to help with some security in some areas.
Well, California's governor doesn't want the federalized system here. He says he's got it under control. There's no shortage of law enforcement. Gavin Newsom said he's called in California Highway Patrol. He says the Trump administration is seeking a spectacle here. He's saying to protesters, don't get violent, don't engage.
Well, if he was doing his job, then people wouldn't have gotten hurt the last couple of days. We wouldn't have officers with a shattered wrist from bricks being thrown through their vehicles being burned, flags being burned in the street, and Molotov cocktails being thrown. Governor Newsom has proven that he makes bad decisions. The president knows that he makes bad decisions, and that's why the president chose the safety of this community over waiting for Governor Newsom to get some sanity. And that's one of the reasons why these National Guard soldiers are being federalized, so they can use their special skill set to keep peace. We're not going to let a repeat of 2020 happen. And if you remember, it all happened in Tim Walz's state in Minneapolis, which was a neighboring state, and a governor at the time. And Governor Tim Walz made very bad decisions and then tried to get the as governors to send our National Guard in to bail him out when he let his city burn for days on end.
Well, he called in National Guard 2 days after the protest, but that was a point of contention, I know, in hindsight. President Trump,
in California, we happen again.
Okay. President Trump said masks will not be allowed to be worn at protests. Who's going to enforce that and how? And how can you justify it when law enforcement officials have their faces covered?
You know, what I would say is that the law is going to be enforced, and that what the laws are in this country is what we are doing, and our ICE officers and our law enforcement officers out there that are in these situations where people have questioned why they have their faces covered. It's for the safety of those individuals or the work that they're doing as far as protecting their identity so they can continue to do investigative work. So,
but are you tasking the National Guard soldiers with removing masks from protesters? I mean, are you trying to use them in that way?
National Guard soldiers are there to provide security for operations and to make sure that we have peaceful protests. So that's what their work is. And I won't get more specific on that just because we never do when it comes to law enforcement operations. We're doing the same standard procedures we always do and have for years in this country with our National Guard and with our law enforcement folks that are on the ground working with these communities.
So the defense secretary also tweeted last night that he put active duty Marines at Camp Pendleton on high alert. We know, since you mentioned 2020, that President Trump during those Black Lives Matter protests at the time had wanted to use active duty U.S. troops on the streets of a major city. The 82nd Airborne at the time was called up. They were not sent into the streets. What exactly do you set as Homeland Security Secretary as your benchmark for when you would counsel the President of the United States to send active duty troops in to police a domestic disturbance?
Well, my hope is always that we work with local leaders that would do their jobs. And that is what has failed in LA, is that the mayor has refused to recognize the dangerous situation that she's perpetuating, as well as the governor. When we ask for backup in a situation, LAPD has waited hours to respond, and they've waited until we have an officer in a dangerous situation until they come in and help us bring peace. Oftentimes in these cities, you have good leaders that help give backup to other law enforcement officers, but you have politicians who won't give that kind of resource when it's needed. Unfortunately, waiting several hours for LAPD to show up, or telling them telling us that they're not going to back us up until they have an officer in a dangerous situation is something that just isn't workable when you have violent protests going on. So
the U.S.
work better with us, but that's one of the reasons that you've seen the National Guard come in and help us with those security operations.
Well, the U.S. Attorney in L.A. Told CBS that LAPD did help. LAPD does not.
That's what is to me, Margaret, is hours later. They waited until we had officers in dangerous situations, then they responded. Now, if that was my city and I was the mayor, I would be sent law enforcement in there to back up other law enforcement officers. That's what America is about, is that we have rules and we have laws. If you don't like the laws, go to Congress and change them. Someone should go to Congress and say, change the laws. If we don't like what's happening in this country, do that instead of throwing rocks and throwing Molotov cocktails, and instead of attacking law enforcement officers.
Understood.
We're just not going to anymore. This president cares deeply about family members that want to live in their communities and be safe.
Back to the question, though, of active duty troops, different from the National Guard. What is your personal counsel here to the president? Because it's you, the Attorney General, and the Secretary of Defense. We're going to have a lot of responsibility here in implementing some of this call to do this.
Well, let me be clear about something. ICE and Homeland Security are running these operations right now, and the advice and counsel of the Attorney General, the Department of Defense, are extremely important to the President of the United States, and we never discuss our personal conversations and advice to the President of the United States. He makes the decisions. He is the president that sits in that seat, and we are all very proud to work for him. So I'm grateful for the leadership of Pete Hegseth and Pam Bondi, and I get the chance to work with them. Yep. And as does their job today, we're thankful to have the partnership and the leadership of President Trump.
Well, some Republican senators, like Senator Lankford, have said active duty Marines are not going to be put into local law enforcement. So there are Republican lawmakers questioning this. To the question about where we are seeing the National Guard troops centered around this Roy Ball Center, CBS is reporting undocumented immigrants attending their ICE check-ins were being detained and held overnight in the basement of that building. And there were lawyers for some of those detainees claiming it was illegal because the migrants were held in makeshift facilities with limited access to food and water. That was one of the sources of the protest. Can you vouch for these facilities? And do you understand what some of these protesters are concerned about?
Well, these protests started long before we ended up in the situations that we saw when we were trying to secure these individuals and the law enforcement officers involved. What I would say is getting individuals in and out of those facilities was extremely challenging when the violence broke out and when things were being thrown at vehicles and people were rocking vehicles and shaking them, trying to break into them. In fact, we had to send a swift response team in to get a female officer out of her vehicle safely in those situations. So we are following all the laws and procedures as we always do. But when you have violence like that, the safety of everybody involved is incredibly important, and we'll make sure that we get people through them without injury as best to our ability.
Secretary Noem, we're going to have to leave that there. Thank you for your time this morning, and we apologize to our viewers about any audio drops you may have heard there. I heard a few myself. Face the Nation will be back in 1 minute. Stay with us. We are now joined by Texas Republican Representative Tony Gonzalez. Good morning and good to have you here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You're always focused on immigration because of your district, but when you're watching what happens out there in LA and using federal authorities as they are being used here, are you comfortable with what the president is doing?
Yeah, first, happy birthday to my mama who's back in San Antonio. To your question, yes, I am comfortable with it. It's tragic to see what's happening in LA. I spent 20 years in the military. I fought in 2 wars. I fought to give people the freedom to protest whatever the hell they want to. But what we're seeing in LA are not advocates, we're seeing anarchists. And the president of the United States should absolutely put down the mob as soon as possible. But this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Are you comfortable with active duty Marines being put on high alert for possible deployment to quell a civil disturbance?
If need be, but you always want to escalate.
Against the will of the government.
You always want to escalate to de-escalate, but it first starts where you have to have local law enforcement get engaged. But if local law enforcement is removed, and then you don't have the state law enforcement, then who is going to take care of the people? I want to see safety. I want to see safety and security, all places to include LA. But once again, this is the tip of the iceberg. We're talking about 100,000 people that have been deployed, or that have been deported. The numbers are about to go way up.
Well, we have reached out to the state. We have reached out to the mayor. The LAPD, as I was reading there, the top federal prosecutor in that city said LAPD did respond. The sheriff and Paramount said they aren't there to do federal law enforcement, but they did respond when federal authorities were in peril and asked for help. But bringing it to your district, you have a major city, you have San Antonio. You also have rural areas. Is the administration targeting blue cities with blue governors they don't like, or are you seeing similar actions in Texas?
I think what they're targeting is they're trying to deport people as fast as they possibly can. What's going to happen is it's going to be across the country. And once again, this is the tip of the iceberg. Joe Biden took a hatchet.
What do you mean by that?
Joe Biden took a hatchet to an already broken immigration system. Right now, there's over 400,000 asylum seekers that under the last administration had their cases closed without adjudication. They weren't given a yes, they weren't given a no, they just had their cases closed. So one could argue that these 400,000 people are in this country illegally and should be deported immediately. One could also argue that these 400,000 people did not get proper, an opportunity to state their case, and they didn't have that ability. What I'm worried about is this thing's going to escalate. It's not going to be just LA. It'll be cities all over the country as we continue to deport people.
You said back in November the administration would fail if it began going after non-violent migrants. You said if the message is we're here to deport your abuelita, this is not going to work well. You heard our reporting. People are getting arrested going to court appearances, trying to abide by the law. We have these cases of, for example, a 19-year-old high schooler on his way to volleyball team practice in Massachusetts, arrested because his student visa had expired. An Afghan soldier in Houston who used to guard American soldiers at bases with 8 kids to his name, arrested even though he entered this country with legal status. Are these people the worst of the worst?
They're not. But this is what's going to happen is as these 400,000 asylum seekers that are in limbo, if you will, start to get deported. Maria, who's 23 years old, that was from Honduras, that was told to come to the United States for a better life and has gotten married and has had children. As she gets ripped from that life and gets sent back to Honduras, it's going to be very painful for us. What I'd like for us to do is focus on the convicted criminal illegal aliens. Last year, I asked the administration.
Is that happening? Because right now, it looks like they're trying to run up the numbers, frankly.
Last year, I asked the administration what that number was. It was 662,000. Last month, I asked, as of July of last year, last month, I asked Secretary Noem under oath, I asked her, has that number increased or has that number decreased? She responded that the number of convicted criminal illegal aliens has increased. So that means we have over 600,000. We should absolutely focus on that population, the worst of the worst, and make sure that those are the areas that get removed. Otherwise, it's going to take us down this route of constant civil conflict.
The vice president used what's happening as an opportunity to say that this massive bill the president wants Congress to pass should get passed quickly. It's got about $46 billion for the border wall, other money for Border Patrol. The Homeland Security chair in the Senate, Rand Paul, was on this program last Sunday. He said this is too much money. It inflates the cost of the wall 8-fold. Should the Senate claw back some of the money that members of the House just passed?
Well, I don't know if Rand Paul has ever found a bill he's ever liked, and he's probably not wrong because every bill has flaws to it. But there's $168 billion in this bill for border security. That's important. But it's also important that we have oversight to these funds. You can't just write a blank check to the administration and expect them to go out and accomplish these. These are very complicated, difficult tasks. This is where Congress has to come alongside and make sure that those funds are going to the right places. That once again, that we're going after these convicted, over 600,000 convicted criminal illegal aliens, that everyone, agrees that, you take those people out of your community, everyone gets safe. That's the area we should focus on.
So you voted for this bill,
Sure.
the last version of it that the Senate is now tweaking. You're also a fan of Elon Musk. You were on this program, I think it was back in March, and you said he's like the prime minister of the United States. Sorry, December, I think. Musk said about this bill, this massive, outrageous, pork-filled congressional spending bill is a disgusting abomination. You know it was wrong. Are you going to reconsider your vote after the Senate finishes its review?
Well, one, Elon has done more for humanity and is going to continue to do more. That's why I'm a fan of his. Two is he speaks without a filter. He's not wrong. That bill had a lot of issues to it, but I don't get it. As a member, I get to say yes or no. I get to make it as best as possible. We got to see what the Senate does. What I'm really concerned is are they going to touch Medicaid? Right? The president has said don't touch Medicaid. We've come out very early on, a lot of members on the House, to make sure you don't gut programs that work, and how do you give money to the resources where you need it, like border security. So the Senate's going to do its part. I got to wait to see the final product before I'm a yes or no, but I think we have a lot of work to do.
Are you comfortable with what it does to Medicaid?
Right now, from where it was, yeah, I'm okay with people having to work in order to get benefits. I don't want to see, what I don't want to see is I don't want to see seniors have, and the most vulnerable of our population have their health care ripped away from them. And I think a lot of that has been clawed back.
Well, we will watch the developing news on this front. Thank you, Congressman.
Great. Thanks, Margaret.
We'll be right back. We turn now to Minnesota Democratic Senator Amy Klobuchar, who joins us from Minneapolis. Good morning, Senator. You heard Secretary Noem say what's happening in LA and the decisions being made about it at the federal level have to do with what happened in 2020 in Minneapolis and what she called the missteps of your governor, Tim Walz, at the time. You lived through all that. What would you advise Governor Newsom to do out in California now?
Every governor is going to make their own decisions based on the situation. In this case, Governor Newsom has made clear that he wants local law enforcement protecting the citizens, and he has asked the president not to inflame the situation. In Governor Walz's case, as you pointed out in the earlier segment, he did bring in the National Guard. I would also point out that on January 6th, I was there as well. And what I saw there was the president didn't bring in the National Guard when over 100 police officers were injured or hurt or worse. And so I think it is quite, we'll say, ironic, probably doesn't fit this situation, when you have got administration officials talking about protecting police officers after what happened on January 6th. And when I look at what's going on in California or across the country, of course, as a congressman said, you want to get dangerous criminals out of our midst, out of our communities. But when you look at where the American people are, they want to make sure you follow the law and that there's due process, and you don't want to inflame things by threatening to bring in the Marines or deporting people based on a mistake.
Senator, we're going to take a quick break and continue this conversation. You have such a key role in oversight of law enforcement on the judiciary. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Face the Nation. We return now to our conversation with Senator Klobuchar. Senator, it seems that the president's use of the National Guard as he's federalizing them is somewhat novel. It's the first time since 1965 a president has activated a state's National Guard without a request from the governor. That's according to the Brennan Center for Justice. What concerns do you have about going in this direction? It's about 60 days that have been authorized in the proclamation he signed last night.
My concern, of course, is that this inflames the situation and that he is hell-bent on inflaming the situations. Individual governors look at their states and make decisions. But in this case, the president, time and time again, has shown this willingness to one, violate the laws we've seen across the country in many different situations outside of the immigration context, and two, inflame situations. So what do I think he should be doing right now? Who do I think he should be bringing in? I think he should be bringing in economists to talk to him right now about what's happening with the debt and with his big, beautiful betrayal of the middle class, to be talking to him about what's going on with the tariffs and how they are hurting small businesses. I think he should be bringing in the people that I talk to every day, regular people, farmers whose markets are drying up, people who are worried about their moms or their grandmas getting kicked out of their assisted living because of his Medicaid cuts. When Josh Hawley calls this morally bereft, that it's immoral to make these Medicaid cuts, and when Elon Musk comes in and says that this is a disgusting abomination, this bill, and when it is now triggering, get this, Medicare cuts, something that hasn't been discussed yet, because it adds so much to the deficit that rural hospitals are going to get cut. I think that's who we should be listening to right now, instead of his constant effort for shock and awe and trying to distract people what they care about most, which is the economy and their family situation.
We're going to talk about some of those very issues with Kevin Hassett, one of the president's top economic advisors, shortly, including that idea of Medicare being touched, which is being floated, but we haven't heard from the administration on in detail. But the president's putting immigration front and center here. We see in our polling that, at least before what happened in LA, that this was broadly supported. 54% of Americans like his deportation policies. I'm wondering how much you worry that this puts Democrats on the back foot, that you are put in the position of defending someone like Abrego Garcia, who was just brought back to the United States from El Salvador and is now being charged by the Justice Department on these claims that he was involved somehow in human trafficking. This is that Maryland man who was, according to the Justice Department, wrongly sent to a prison in El Salvador on suspicion of being a member of a gang, which his family denied.
So Democrats believe in public safety. As a former prosecutor, it's been a lot of my life work working with law enforcement. And that means you don't inflame things and make it worse. And that is that you make sure that violent criminals aren't in our midst. But even when you look at your own poll that just came out this morning, a strong majority of people believe that people should at least follow the rule of law and have due process so people aren't mistakenly deported. When I look at the Abrego Garcia case, I see two things. The first is that you have to follow the law. The second is the charges will be dealt with in the justice system. That's how this works. And of course, they should have done that at the get-go and not wrongfully deported him and handled the charges in our country. But in the end, to me, this is about the rule of law and enforcing the laws. And again, when I look at your polling, 70% of the people said that while a number of them will support deporting violent criminals, I support that, okay? Right. But 70% of them said that these policies either don't help with the economy or they weaken the economy. They are not there. They want this president. They voted for him, a bunch of them in the middle, who in my state also voted for me. They want him to bring down costs. They don't want him to be kicking old people out of assisted living or cut the food assistance for veterans. They want them to be working on things that help them in their daily lives. That's what also comes out in your polling numbers.
Yep. As you know, Republicans say they're not cutting Medicaid, they're making it more efficient, but we will talk to Kevin Hassett about some of the specifics of what you just raised there. In our poll, though, it also shows among those polled that congressional Democrats are overwhelmingly seen as ineffective in challenging Trump. 71% of Democrats say their leaders are ineffective. You are in Democratic leadership. Why are they wrong?
So when you look at what's happening here, Trump is doing some really bad things to people, right? Small businesses are closing down. The economy has retracted in the first quarter. And when I get out there talking to independents, Republicans, or Democrats, they're basically saying the same thing. They're really scared of what's happening right now to their families, and they want to see leadership. So we cannot be the party of the status quo. That is for certain. And I'm actually really excited about our new candidates that are going to be running in the midterms. The recruiting is going on. And when you look at the actual facts, the actual numbers, look over at my neighbors over in Wisconsin for the Supreme Court race, where 10 Trump counties were flipped from red to blue because people have had it with this. Or look at some of the legislative races around the country, Margaret. Our constituents are standing up, and we are by their side, whether they're Democrats, moderate Republicans, or independents. They are showing up at rallies. They are voting. That's the number one most important thing. Democratic attorney generals are bringing cases in court that the public supports. They don't want to see veterinarians eliminated from the USDA, or they don't want to see funding frozen for cancer trials. And then you look at Congress. We are holding them accountable with votes. All we need is 4 Republicans to stand up against what Josh Hawley calls immoral Medicaid cuts, just 4 of them. All we need is 4 Republicans to stand up against these food assistance that throws millions of people, veterans, seniors, kids. 40% of the people that get food assistance are kids. To stand up against shifting money over to the states so Pennsylvania would suddenly get a huge amount, millions of dollars shifted over to them, or over in North Carolina, where you've seen over 500 million shifted. People need to stand up. The Republicans need to stand up. To me, that's leadership. Not defending the status quo for our party, but moving forward with a forward-thinking agenda and new energy.
All right, understand. Senator Klobuchar, thank you for your time today. We'll be right back. We're joined now by the director of the National Economic Council, Kevin Hassett. He joins us from the White House. Good morning to you.
Hey, Margaret. Good morning.
So I do want to allow you to respond to some of the very specific criticisms that Senator Klobuchar made. One of the things she brought up was something that, frankly, the Senate Majority Leader seemed to acknowledge was under discussion, and that was touching Medicare, making some kind of adjustment. He said anything we can do that's waste, fraud, and abuse is open to discussion. Is the White House open to any discussion around Medicare?
Well, first of all, what's happening is that the senators, respecting the legislative process, are discussing what they think that they can put on the table. And the president has made it clear that ending waste, fraud, and abuse, and giving benefits to illegals, and giving benefits to people who are able-bodied workers, those are his high priorities. If the Senate comes up with other things they'd like us to look at, I guess we would have a look at them. But there have been a lot of false stories about Medicare being on the table, and it's totally not on the table. The way that was covered in the news a couple of weeks ago was that in the end, when the budget process ends, if they don't waive the budget caps, then there's going to be reductions across the board in spending, and that's what no one would intend, and no Democrat would vote for that. But that was covered as our intent to go after Medicare, and it was just a big fake news story last week.
Okay, so Leader Thune and Leader Johnson and Speaker Johnson have said anything with waste, fraud, and abuse. But you right now are taking
waste, fraud, and abuse. But is the same.
Understood. But you were taking Medicare off the table. The White House says don't do it.
No, but I've seen a massive amount of waste, fraud, and abuse in Medicaid, and I've not been briefed on Medicare waste, fraud, and abuse.
Okay.
But if they find something, then of course we would look at it.
You would look at it. Senator Hawley was also brought up by Senator Klobuchar. And Missouri Senator has made it clear he wants to see changes to the increased co-payment requirements for Medicaid. That was in the House version that was sent over to the Senate. Are you comfortable with this House bill as it is written? What do you want to see done to Medicaid?
Right. Again, what we want to see done now is we want the Senate to pass the bill, and then we want the House and the Senate to work out their differences while negotiating with us. And right now, the Senate has to get the votes they need to pass the bill, and we're supporting them in that process. But you also need to be mindful when you're thinking about this that one of the things that we put out a report for the Council of Economic Advisors that if the bill doesn't pass, then they estimate that this would cause a reduction of GDP by 4%. We'd be in a deep recession. We'd lose 6 or 7 million jobs, and those people, almost all those people, would lose their insurance. And so this idea that the only person who ever is going to get insurance is someone who's getting it from the government is just incorrect. And if we create the jobs that we have in the bill, then we're going to create a heck of a lot more insurance than what we're talking about in waste, fraud, and abuse.
So you're open to what Senator Hawley is looking to change, though. That's what I understand.
I'd have to go see what he has, and I'd want to look at the fine details before I say I'm open it. And I also would want to talk to the president about the specific matter, which I've not done.
Okay. So one of the other massive influences on the economy right now is the trade war, particularly with China. Mm-hmm. Tomorrow in London, the Treasury Secretary, the Trade Representative, and the Commerce Secretary are going to meet with Chinese officials. Treasury Secretary Bessent told us last Sunday that the recent tension was around exports of critical minerals. When will those exports resume, and what do you expect to come from tomorrow's meeting?
Right. Those exports of critical minerals have been getting released at a rate that is, higher than it was, but not as high as we believe we agreed to in Geneva. And President Trump, being a deal maker, talked with President Xi, and he said, let's take, our senior guys and the people who are the same level as you, let's have them meet somewhere, and let's get these things cleared up, and then we'll clear up what you don't like that we've agreed to release on our side, and we're going to shake hands about it. He literally said, I want to meet in London, and I want to shake hands on it so that we know we've got a deal. And then after that, I think there was a very affable exchange about President Trump visiting China and President Xi coming here. And so I'm very comfortable that this deal is about to be closed. And it's going to be closed not with a bunch of staffers and bureaucratic language, but with handshakes. So that's the way President Trump operates.
But same terms, nothing new.
Well, I think that we can't talk about the terms that they're coming out with tomorrow because they're still working on it. But the point is we want the rare earths, the magnets that are crucial for cell phones and everything else to flow just as they did before the beginning of April. And we don't want any technical details slowing that down. And that's clear to them.
So our CBS News polling shows that most Americans don't like the tariffs. And most Americans don't think the Trump administration has a plan. We're also hearing from top economists, including the head of the Philadelphia Federal Reserve, who said the rules are really unclear and business leaders need certainty. When will they get that certainty from the administration?
Right. Well, you can be certain that there's going to be some tariffs, and the stuff that folks have been saying is going to happen to tariffs is inconsistent with what you and I have talked about before, Margaret. So what's going on, right, is that we've had a trade deficit with China forever and ever because they just want to sell stuff here so that they can create jobs in China and help, control their government. So if people are unemployed, then it's harder for a dictatorship to run. And so the point is just that if we put a tariff on them, then they're going to bear the tariff. And so what just happened? What just happened is that we had about $60 billion in tariff revenue in the U.S. And inflation, every measure of inflation is the lowest that it's been for more than 4 years. And so all of our policies together are reducing inflation and helping reduce the deficit by getting revenue from other countries. And how much revenue? I think that you might have covered it. The Congressional Budget Office put out a 10-year estimate that says that the tariff revenue that's already in place right now is going to raise $2.8 trillion over the next 10 years. That's more than their own estimate, their own static estimate for the cost of this entire bill. So that's deficit reduction right there.
Well, I'm glad you brought up that stat because it made me wonder. You just said that one certainty is there will be tariffs. You are saying tariffs are staying put. That this is a constant source
reciprocal. You've seen deals. You've seen deals. Yes, and exactly where they are, we're working it out, and we're opening up markets.
But deals. This is where I'm stuck because deals is about negotiating down the tariffs. So that's a diminishing source of revenue over time. But are you saying that there will be blanket tariffs of
last year?
What percent?
Last year, before we got here, we were raising $80 billion a year in tariffs. Right now, the CBO projects that we're going to get $2.8 trillion over the next 10 years. Exactly where the number ends up is going to depend on how much foreign countries open up their markets to our products and how well they treat our farmers.
So you don't know how much revenue you're going to have.
But revenue was $80 billion last year. Tariff revenue is not going away. That's what I'm saying.
But we don't know what the tariffs are going to be.
We're negotiating them on a country-by-country basis. We've got a whole bunch of trade deals. We've got a trade deal with the UK that's already, you can see what the trade deal with the UK is now.
Right, so it's a fluctuating number. It's not a constant. But before I let you go, the Senate Finance Chair, I know you were in this meeting at the White House this week.
Sure.
He indicated quadrupling the state and local tax deduction or SALT tax is not something he's interested in doing. They don't have the politics in the Senate like they do in the House that would require it, right? So is the White House committed to keeping this quadrupling of the SALT tax deduction as it is?
The president has said that he supports changing the law, the state and local tax deduction. And this is a very, it's a horse trading issue with the Senate and the House. And again, the president has listed his priorities on the tax bill. And it's no tax on tips, no tax on overtime. You know them all. And the Senate and the House, they know that those priorities for the president are red lines. And then on the other side, they're negotiating what they're going to negotiate because there's a differing level of support in the Senate that there was in the House. And in the end, the one thing we need, the president wants, is a bill that passes and passes on the 4th of July.
So Senator Crapo needs to prepare himself that is staying as the House wrote it.
He's got to work it out with the House.
Okay. Kevin Hassett, thank you for your time this morning.
Guys.
We'll be back in a moment. We turn now to the international efforts to alleviate the extraordinary humanitarian crisis in Gaza. And we're joined by the CEO of Save the Children, Janti Soeripto. Welcome back to Face the Nation.
Thank you, Margaret.
So there are 1 million children in Gaza in desperate need. The UN says the 11-week Israeli blockade has caused the rate of young children suffering from acute malnutrition to triple. What are you able to get in to help?
So since March 2nd, Save the Children has been able to get nothing in whatsoever.
Even though the blockade's over?
Even though the blockade is formally over, we haven't been able to get any of the 50 trucks that we have around Gaza on the border ready to go in. We haven't been able to get anything in.
Why?
So our staff are operating currently still with what we have. We have dwindling stocks, medical supplies, therapeutic malnutrition treatment for children, very young children. We're still working where we can and delivering goods while we can, but these stocks are dwindling fast.
What's the choke point? Why can't your trucks get in?
We haven't gotten any authorization to get them in.
From the Israeli authorities?
Yes.
Is the U.S. government helping at all?
I think there's an effort. I think there's a recognition that the humanitarian situation as it is completely untenable, that we're looking at mass starvation of innocent civilians and above all very young children, as you said. So there's attempts being made. We think that those attempts currently are completely ineffective and inadequate.
The director of Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza told CBS this morning that only a few hours remain before the generators in the hospital shut down because they don't have enough fuel to keep them going. What are your medical workers seeing on the ground? What happens if a hospital like that can't function?
Yeah, I'm not surprised by that. It's completely abhorrent. We're hearing stories from colleagues in Gaza that are talking about children who have to undergo surgery and then they wake up during the surgery because there's not enough anesthetics. So that is what's happening. That is what it looks like.
That is horrific.
It is.
The UN office that oversees these efforts have warned as well that kids are leaving households because their parents are gone.
That's right. There's thousands and thousands of children who've lost one or more parents, lost their immediate family. So yes, we'll have kids, young kids, taking care of their younger siblings, trying to survive.
What does that do to a society?
It's unbelievable what's happening to this generation of 2 million people in Gaza. The trauma is hard to overestimate. We're hearing mothers tell us that now their children are essentially waiting their turn to die.
How does your staff continue to function when they're told things like that?
It's horrific, as you can imagine. So we have almost 200 staff there, almost all of them Palestinians. And can you imagine, they still go out every day. They have their own children to take care of. They can't feed their own kids adequately. They still go out every day trying to deliver, give medical assistance to kids and mothers where they can, hand out food whilst we still have it, trying to give people trauma counseling whilst if we can reach them. But it is incredibly difficult. They're just trying to survive, almost, I think, pushing away, thinking about the trauma too much, because otherwise it's very difficult, I think, to get up and go to work.
So your organization does help like this, emergency help like this around the world. The Trump administration has called on the UN to work with this new organization called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. It's got the Israeli government support to deliver aid. We've seen a number of deadly shootings documented in proximity to their posts, a lot of criticism. They told the public yesterday that they'd received threats from Hamas, but then they didn't share details of that with CBS when we asked. Do you know what's happening? Because this is a U.S.-backed organization.
It seems so. We have given a lot of input and shared our concerns. We and all the other operational agencies operational in Gaza have shared our concerns. With this new mechanism, we thought the existing mechanism worked just fine. When we had the pause in fighting from January till March, as you recall, we got trucks and trucks of supplies in at scale. We were able to deliver. We treated children with malnutrition. We did vaccinations. We did medical care, etc. The hospitals were operating. There was fuel to operate that generator in Al Shifa Hospital, and that worked. So this current new mechanism doesn't seem to work. The failings seem to play out exactly in the way that we warned against. It is also a militarization of aid. If you put men with guns near to a distribution point and then you ask a desperate, starving population to come and walk for miles to get boxes of food, you're going to create crowd control issues and increased risk of harm to an already incredibly desperate population.
And boxes of food are not what you can give to a child who's in the midst of starvation.
Exactly right. It is completely inadequate support as well.
Janti Soeripto from Save the Children, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
We'll be right back. That's it for us today. Thank you all for watching. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.